Welcome on the video. Today we're looking at what if Civilization Start Over 2 Human Scenario, Age of Conflict. Now I haven't thought of what I want to do for this video. I haven't really thought of what I would like to do. But I'm just gonna tell you guys there's gonna be 2 videos that I'm gonna upload today. And another video I might upload this weekend, so probably gonna happen and probably not gonna happen, so don't really much expect anything. But we have many events that have been going on around here. I've changed a few things. I didn't like how this area was so filled in, and knowing that at this point in time the Mesopotamians would actually be on the back foot, or the Mesonians would be on the back foot of technological advancements, and everyone else around them except Ankarans, who are also kind of full of themselves. Both are full of themselves, thinking, oh, we won't fall, we will be so strong, while they are kind of falling. It's kind of things that's going on here. But at this point, the rotting plague has started to die down, and eventually it has given itself one little region that it still haunts to this day, and that's the southern parts over here that kind of caused a lot of problems for the nation that was over here. But we quickly see that eventually the rotting plague, or the green plague as it's called, will fall over, and we see that the Abkhazians can finally turn into a true nation. And with the Abkhazians finally having their own nation, and finally getting rid of the guys who kind of controlled them before, they will quickly start to go into Upper Abkhazia, and we quickly see that they managed to do a lot over here. Caucasia will actually meet up with the Abkhazians on their border, and we quickly see a border is quickly established between these two people. Although it's pretty much normalized around here that the border stays like it is. Many people think that this guy will try to do something, but it technically won't. Georgia over here managed to survive, and so has done a few things, like started the Georgian Empire, which is very large and spans all the way into the Armenian populations, but it's not as strong as the surrounding empires, and not as large as them. But not being so large and not being so strong help when in the region you are the strongest of your own area. Down in the south and around these regions, we see that a quick expansion by the Blues is thwarted by both Georgian and southern, well, no one, I don't know what to call this, but basically expansions over here have halted their own expansion quite significantly too. And we see that this was their expansion, and this was the red team's expansion. Now the Georgian Empire quickly managed to do a lot over here. The red team also managed to do some things over here, although when they tried, the guys over here tried to break out of their whole area over here, but before they could, the red guys cut them off, and we're like, haha, now we cut you off, let's just go over here. Oh, something's weird. As not only has Ankara taken over Bulgoskaya, which I have kind of differentiated from a few things. We'll talk about what's happening over here in a bit. But the Ankarans have also taken over this area. They have also demanded the Georgian Empire to give them these regions, and also demanded that they give over some of the territories that they have over here, which they comply and do. But for this guy, they had to give over a lot of their territory, which was a very bad idea on their part, because now this guy had a border with them, and they were like, yo, we like you, and the Ankarans are like, wait, you do? It's kind of weird. But at this point, Ankara is in Armenian areas. Mesopotamia has been doing a lot, so let's go over to the mercenary band. Now, as you can see, there's not very much happening, but the colors here are a bit different. As we quickly see, a mercenary force of around a few hundred K, not few hundred K, but few hundred, will take over specific parts of Sicily and basically will become pirates in these areas, taking over a lot of regions. Over here they go and start the war against the nation over here, but we quickly see that they will be thwarted and their attempts at taking this city down goes down with them. Although the Carthaginians do give up the city, they do not give up the town, so it needs to be taken. And we quickly see that New Carthagia is almost declared, but down south a breakout of these guys has happened, and we quickly see that it's not very good for the Carthaginians. Both these Carthaginians in the south, they call themselves Two Carthagia, and the Carthaginians of north, because at this point the Carthaginians have sent the second army over here because of Moroccan attempts at their territory. And at this point the Moroccans have been able to lose some territory, actually, with a lot of determination. They really much wanted it back, but at this point the second army had to reinforce the borders, but at some point they couldn't defend a large part of the area, losing a bit of their border regions, which was a bad thing to let happen, because then the Atlas people, aka the Numidians, saw this weakness and were like, yo, if we just go and take over parts of the region and declare, oh, we're not the ones attacking here, these guys are not us, then it will be very good. We quickly see that the Numidian invasion begins, and the Numidians try and take out the quickest route to supplies, that being the eastern parts over here, but they are quickly cut off and stopped over here, as one of their units has been informed that after it managed to go that far, that it was cut off and destroyed. And this unit over here that was also a part of this was cut off, and they got news that these areas was destroyed, officially disbanding their unit and making them pull back. The second army dispatched some forces, although that allowed for a two-front thing. They kinda managed to hold on to a lot of the territory that was taken from them, and we quickly see that the Carthaginians would only give up a bit of territory. The Atlas, aka the Numidians, then shows a different target, that being the Berber people, and the Berbers hadn't expected an attack from a brother tribal people of the mountains, of the Atlas Mountains, that is. And we quickly see that the Numidic Berber war will begin, and it will last throughout the century and will be very deadly for both sides who are involved. We quickly see that not only will this war begin with very large takeovers by the what appears. I'm getting colonial and modern vibes from Foxhole, like blue against green, kind of white. It's kind of wavy. But we see that attacks happen, and both sides manage to occupy some territory of each other's. Although the Berbers occupy a bit less, they are still as good as the Numidians are in cavalry charges. Eventually this was crushed down, and New Carthagia was born. We also see that parts of Sicily begin to fall over to this mercenary nation, and quickly, as the mercenary nation was starting to win a lot of battles, it saw its first defeat, which was very grave, and they lost a lot of territory, and eventually that territory was annexed by the Sicilians, who quickly made it into a... I don't like the border, that's why I'm going to do this, but basically they made it into another nation here, which, now to think of it, this looks like a better thing, but eventually the Syracusans didn't like the arrangement they had, so they just broke away with the regions that they have. And Messana also decided to break away, although with relative ease. And the last area that broke away after the whole thing was this. And we quickly have many things, and the Malta is where these guys went, and the mercenary nation has been born. And we quickly see that the mercenary nation shall send its people to not only over here, but they will set up a second mercenary nation, quickly giving most of the control over here, but they will take over some very important coastal parts that were previously like taken by the people over here. We even see that this village over here joins them, and we see over here there are some specific events that have happened, like the Green Nation expanding, and same with the Valencians. The Malagans, having heard that the armies over here have not been able to do much, try to ask the armies here to join them, but the armies have already gotten a word of help from the mercenary nation, and basically the mercenary nation of this area has done a lot, managed a lot, and has at this point managed to basically satisfy every need of the armies over here. And we quickly see that the armies will be split amongst the areas over here, quickly making 2 armies for both mercenary army areas. And Malaga was like, yo, this is not good for us because some stuff has been happening. Quickly gets to notice that a war has begun for its territories. Alright, so war begins with a few things. There's still a bit of the plague left in that area. But as we can see, the war began with the Western Iberians starting their attack against Portugal. The first order of business was in signing more rebellions up over here, and those rebellions quickly joined their forces, granting them a lot of territory and giving them also a lot of lands to quickly take over. With those territories, they would push over to 2 of these towns, taking only 1, and that being the northern one. But after that, they would start to focus on the middle areas, because that was very close to the capital. With that done, they would begin another push towards Galicia, and with their push they would first take this town, which they did, but they would encounter the army near these 2 villages. They would before that take 1 village, but once they encountered the army, they would be massively pushed back, and they would even be pushed back towards this town, which they had just started to reinforce. Seeing the possible counterattack that would happen, the Western Iberians, or Madridians, would quickly take these areas and push up in these regions. While that was going on, the Portuguese demanded access to this area so that they could flank these guys, and but when the Malagans said no, we won't, all over their areas we see that villages would be taken that were right on the damn border or right next to the border, and even some other regions would be taken. But we quickly see that the Portuguese would swiftly declare war on these guys, which was a bad idea, as once they started to move here, the Iberians would come and help them out, taking quickly these 2 villages. With that, the Malagan attack would start, and they would quickly do a counter-attack towards these areas, taking basically a lot of them out. And they would quickly take over the southern areas, which were about to kind of start the rebellion. And once the Malagans arrived, these guys were told, alright, you support us through the war and we'll build you a nation that you want. Eventually the war began to see a stalemate after the victory of Lake Yalk, Yalk being this lake, by the Malagans. After a lot of fighting, both sides kind of stopped near areas that they kind of have taken. During the southern offensive, we do see that the army of North managed to actually take back a lot of territories over here, but they didn't do much of anything else. They only managed to do that, and that's all they managed to do basically. With that, they have also done a few other things, but we have seen the rebellion over here managing to finally regain at least some sort of autonomy. They have regained their status as a once great nation, and we quickly see that Malaga will take these areas, while the Western Iberians will take these regions. With that done, I think we won't be able to cover all of the things I have to say here, but I'm gonna quickly say that due to some irregularities in trade and relations, we quickly see that not only will a rebellion spring up, but people all over the known world will quickly start to support the rebellion, knowing that this would pretty much be inevitable. With that being said, quick advances towards Athena make it very clear that the Attican territories would have no ability to defend themselves. Although the first army would quickly defend Attica and Athena, they would be unable to stop the advancements over here on this area. Quickly taking these two towns would not be a very hard thing, but all over the regions over the sea we see a lot of things happening. Also there's a mercenary force over here, but that's not going to be talked about. Seeing this, an army by Sparta will start to move in, and we quickly see they will be able to take out the third army, which will have to go over here. But once they start to attack the rebellion's territories, the rebellion kind of were like, oh, let's just side with Athena. And that's the end of this video. See you guys next time. Yippee! Aitäh!
No more.
Fuck.
Seal on kõige vähem gaasi sees, nii et see maitseb paremini.
Äge. No siis ma pean panema seda külmkappi, siis mulle meeldib külmalt seda. Oota.
Aga teised on minu jaoks.
Okei, aga ma tahan ka minna poodi. Ma lähen poodi.
Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of Chechnya, is on the verge of death. Remember, this isn't just my opinion. Ukrainian military intelligence claims that his kidneys are no longer functioning, that he's on dialysis, and that doctors have stopped giving prognoses. And you might be wondering, wait a minute, why should I care what happens to the leader of some godforsaken religion? Well, you may not care, but for Vladimir Putin, this could be one of the greatest threats he faces. A threat that would jeopardize not only the war in Ukraine, but also the very integrity of Russia itself. The fact is, Chechnya is a veritable separatist powder keg, one that has already erupted twice in recent history, causing 2 wars that have cost the empire more than 100,000 lives. What's more, there are several battalions of Chechens currently fighting in Ukraine against Kremlin troops. For them, this war is merely training for what truly matters. The day they could return to their mountains and fight once again for an independent Chechnya. Just take a look at the words of Adam Osmayev, the commander leading one of these volunteer groups.
I am certain that this war will end with Russia's defeat. Conscientious Chechens will have to restore order in Chechnya once the Russian government collapses. There's a lot of work to be done. That's why we're establishing ties with Ukraine here, so that they can help us restore order in the Caucasus later on.
And yes, of course, there are also those fighting on the Russian side, the troops loyal to the local president. Because the truth is that, so far, the risk of a new revolution has been kept in check precisely thanks to Kadyrov. In a way, he's a good ally of Putin's. The problem, well, as we've said, he's on the verge of death, and the chosen successor is none other than his son, Adam, an 18-year-old who offers no assurance that peace in Chechnya can be maintained for long. All the more so when many Chechens have been waiting for years for a rift like this to open up so they can launch a new revolution. Conclusion, it's not far-fetched to think that Chechnya could once again become a powder keg, and that a new conflict could flare up for Putin while he's still grappling with Ukraine. That's why the questions we are asking are, how close are we to revolution breaking out in Chechnya? What will this mean for Vladimir Putin's government? And what implications might it have for the war in Ukraine, where Russia is not exactly in its prime? We'll take a look at all of that in this video. But first, if you're interested in the world of investing, if you want to learn how to manage your savings, protect yourself against inflation, and figure out how to make money beyond your day job, well, good news. Here at Visual Factory, we have created the Visual Factory Club, a newsletter where every week we send out free content focused on essential financial education, the ABC of what everyone should know to understand the stock market, financial markets in general, investment platforms, how to assess investment opportunities, and which markets may have more or less potential. Because of course, if you want to invest your money so you're not at the mercy of your country's economic instability, you at least need to understand the basics of the financial world. In the Visual Factory Club, you'll learn all of this completely free of charge. Through the link below and this QR code, you can sign up for the club and start receiving the upcoming editions. What's more, when you sign up, you'll receive a dossier where I explain in a clear and simple way the most essential investment concepts, what multiples or the PE ratio are, what indices are, ETFs, derivatives, funds, EPS, you get the idea. After that, every week you'll receive additional materials and market analysis to help you stay informed about what's going on. And by the way, the sooner you sign up, the better, since we send each episode of the series by email, and every edition is unique. If you're not subscribed, you might miss some of them, and you won't be able to access them later. With that said, let's get into the video. To understand the mess that could be coming Putin's way, you first need to understand who the Chechens are. And to do that, the first step is to locate them on the map. Chechnya is here in the North Caucasus, nestled between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, right on the mountainous border separating Russia from Georgia. It's a tiny territory, about 17,000 square kilometers, with a population of barely 1.5 million. Seen this way, it seems impossible that such a small place could have caused an empire so many headaches. And yet, that is exactly what happened. Let me explain why. The key is that the Chechens are nothing like the Russians, not in language, not in religion, and above all, not in how they organize themselves. Chechen society is tribal. It's organized, it's structured into clans, known as tapes, large extended families that owe loyalty to one another, and that for centuries have governed themselves through councils of elders and their own codes of honor. There were never any Tsars or nobility here. Authority does not come from the state, it comes from the clan. Keep this in mind because it will be a recurring theme throughout the video. In Chechnya, power is personal, and religion is intertwined with this way of organizing. The Chechens have been Sunni Muslims for centuries, and they practice this religion within a country with an Orthodox Christian majority. Well, put it all together, a mountain people, tribal, Muslim, and obedient only to their own. Could anyone really have imagined they would integrate peacefully into Russia? A Russia traditionally characterized by a highly centralized power structure and dependent on Moscow. Well, that's exactly what history has shown. Russia arrived in the Caucasus 200 years ago, and just subduing the region took nearly half a century of war until it managed to annex it in the mid-19th century. And did the resistance end there? Far from it. The Chechens have risen up against Moscow every time they've had the chance. Just to give you an idea of how determined they are, they did so even at the worst possible moment, in the midst of World War II. While Nazi Germany was advancing toward the Caucasus, guerrilla fighters were already waging war against Soviet rule in the Chechen mountains, and some, following the old logic that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even saw Hitler as an opportunity to finally rid themselves of Moscow. It was something Stalin never forgave. And in 1944, he did something as brutal as it is hard to imagine. He accused the entire Chechen people, every single one of them, of being traitors and collaborators. And he decided to wipe them off the map, not by killing them, but by uprooting them from their land, deporting the entire nation to Central Asia. And when we say entire, we mean entire. Virtually 100% of the population, some 400,000 people, were crammed into cattle cars bound for Kazakhstan. It's estimated that about a quarter of them died, and the survivors were not allowed to return home until 1957, when Khrushchev permitted their return. It's something the Chechens have never forgotten, and that memory explains almost everything that came afterwards. Because when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Chechens saw a golden opportunity. And what did they do? Precisely, they declared their independence. Moscow held off for 3 years without reacting. But December 1994, Yeltsin sent in the tanks. On paper, it was supposed to be a military walk in the park, lasting only a couple of weeks. In practice, it was a historic disaster. The Chechens turned their capital, Grozny, into a death trap for Russian armoured vehicles and bled the army, the successor to the Soviet one, dry for 2 years with pure guerrilla warfare. The situation reached such a point that in 1996, Russia was forced to sign a peace agreement and withdraw. Chechnya remained a de facto independent republic. Real power ended up in the hands of warlords like Shamil Basayev, a hero of the First War for many Chechens, and at the same time a radical who gradually drifted toward jihadism under the influence of Katab, an Arab commander who had come from the Afghan war zone. Kidnappings as a national industry, attacks, Islamic courts, Chechnya became a black hole. And in August 1999, Basayev and Katab made the mistake that changed everything. They invaded Dagestan, the neighbouring republic, in hopes of spreading their Islamic revolution there. But just take a minute to consider what that meant. Dagestan is and was territory of the Russian Federation. In other words, in practice, that de facto independent Chechnya set out to invade Russia. And that wasn't all. Weeks later, a series of attacks on apartment buildings killed nearly 300 people while they slept in Moscow and other cities. The Kremlin blamed Chechen terrorists, and the former KGB agent who had just been appointed Prime Minister saw the perfect opportunity to go down in history and seize control. That man was none other than Vladimir Putin himself. Putin promised to hunt down the terrorists, even in the bathroom, and launched the Second War. This time there was no blindly sending in tanks like in 1994. Russia crushed Chechnya with massive, systematic bombings. Grozny was so devastated that the UN went so far as to call it the most destroyed city on the entire planet. But guess what? Even with that, the Chechen fighters didn't give up. They took to the mountains and brought the war to the rest of the country. Guerrilla warfare in the Caucasus Mountains and terror in the heart of Russia.
In October 2002, a Chechen commando unit stormed the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow in the middle of a performance and took more than 700 hostages. Russian forces responded by flooding the building with a secret gas. About 90 hostages died, most from the gas itself. Later, in September 2004, another commando unit seized a school in Beslan on the first day of the school year, taking more than 1,100 hostages. After 3 days of hell, the final assault left 334 dead. Half of them were children. In March 2010, 2 women carried out suicide bombings in the Moscow metro during rush hour, killing 40 people.
Now then, how did Russia manage to put an end to all that? Well, here's where it gets interesting, because it didn't do so with more bombings. Very soon, Moscow realised that it could spend decades chasing guerrillas and terrorists through the mountains, and that this was simply unfeasible. So it changed its strategy. The plan was called Chechenization, and the idea was as simple as it was devious, that the war against the Chechens would be won by other Chechens. And so Russia began offering amnesties to fighters who switched sides. Amnesty, and sometimes certain privileges as well. So thousands did just that. Former guerrillas who knew every trail, every hiding place, and every face in the resistance were now hunting down their former comrades. Well, with that machine in motion, the Russian security services eliminated the rebel leaders one by one. Maskhadov fell in 2005 and Basayev in 2006. Eventually, what remained of the insurgency scattered across the Caucasus or fled abroad. And so in 2009, Moscow officially declared the war over. But there was one problem. In order for Chechenization to work, Putin was missing one piece, the most important one of all. He needed a Chechen with real authority, someone the clans would respect, who was willing to rule this hornet's nest on Moscow's behalf. And the man he found was just the man for the job. Although, to be honest, he actually found him long before declaring the war over. Mind you, this isn't the Kadyrov you would know. This isn't Ramzan, the one for the videos, the medals, and the private army. No, in this case we're talking about his father, Akhmat Kadyrov. The thing is, Akhmat had exactly what Moscow needed. Two weapons. The first was religious authority. He had been a mufti, the spiritual leader of the Chechens. And the second, a powerful clan behind him. Well, Akhmat, who had fought against Russia in the First War, switched sides and began offering the guerrillas a deal to lay down their arms and join him. Presenting himself as the man capable of restoring order, he sealed the original pact with the Kremlin. Control and loyalty in exchange for money, local power and backing. However, in 2004, Akhmat was blown to bits. Literally. A bomb killed him during a Victory Day parade in Grozny. And then the entire machinery, the pact and the power passed into the hands of his son, Ramzan.
Find the best rates for Novotel Wollongong North Beach. Book today and save.
Ramzan took his father's legacy and fortified it in his own way. He neutralized and eliminated any rival with military clout and connections in Moscow, and he did so until, within Chechnya, stability and his own person became one and the same. No one else. No one to overshadow him. Neither friends nor enemies, just him. So how did Putin seal the deal? Through an exchange. The fact is, peace in Chechnya was never a military victory. It was a pact. Moscow put two things on the table: money in abundance and almost total autonomy. In exchange, it demanded two things: absolute loyalty to the Kremlin and stability within the Republic. In other words, you keep Chechnya peaceful and loyal to Russia, and we won't set foot there or ask what you're doing within its borders. That was the deal. And that deal has sustained the Chechen status quo for nearly 20 years. A structure built on three very simple pillars. The first is federal funding. Chechnya is one of the most heavily subsidized republics on the entire planet. Around 80% of its budget comes directly from Moscow. And to see where that money goes, there's no better example than the capital itself, Grozny. Look at what it was like at the end of the wars. It was a city literally razed to the ground, reduced to rubble. And now look at how it is today. Skyscrapers, blooming avenues, and one of the largest mosques in Russia and Europe. A spectacular transformation that has been paid for entirely with rubles from Moscow. And that same money is what oils the entire machinery of Kadyrov's regime. It paid for the reconstruction, it pays the salaries of the loyalists who support him, and it feeds a slush fund that he controls almost single-handedly. And of course, above all, it pays for his greatest life insurance, his own army. And that is precisely the second pillar, his private army, the Kadryovtsi. Tens of thousands of armed men who, on paper, are part of the Russian National Guard, but in practice answer only to Kadyrov.
Its hardcore consists of the so-called Akhmat Special Forces, which, according to estimates, range in size from 4,000 to 13,000 men. Surrounding them is a loose network of loyal units numbering in the tens of thousands. This is no amateur force. The Akhmat force operates almost like a miniature army, with its own intelligence, artillery units, drone teams, and even medical services, an autonomous structure, practically a state within a state.
And where have they been seen in action? Primarily in Ukraine. When the invasion broke out, Kadyrov turned the war into his grand showcase. He even boasted of having sent 26,000 Chechen fighters, 7,000 of them on the front lines, and created a dozen new battalions bearing the Akhmat brand out of thin air. But watch out, because there's a catch here. These men have ended up with a nickname that says it all: the TikTok Army. Why? Well, because much of their presence in Ukraine has been more propaganda than combat. Heroic videos recorded for social media, firing up positions that were already empty, pure theatre. In fact, many analysts agree that their role is psychological rather than military. They are the muscle Moscow flaunts to intimidate, rather than the force it actually sends to the front lines. In any case, don't let the meme fool you, because their role in Ukraine is one thing, and their role at home is quite another. The fact is that within Chechnya, this force is absolutely real and absolutely feared. In Chechnya, they don't record videos for TikTok. There, they are Kadriov's political police. They are the ones who keep watch, who make arrests, who make people who are a thorn in the regime's side disappear. They are the ones who show up at dawn at the home of anyone who criticises them, and often at the homes of their families as well. Their true mission is not to take Konstantinovka, it's to keep all of Chechnya in line, so that no one, absolutely no one, dares to raise their head. And this brings us to the third pillar, the personal pact with Putin. And take note, because this pact has become far more crucial given everything that has happened to Russia since the start of the war. You see, in recent years, Russia has changed its so that's the way its power is distributed within the country. Today, more than ever, only one thing truly matters: proximity to Putin. And if we want to dig deeper and understand exactly how power has shifted in Russia, we've recently published this video here on Google Politics with all the details. By the way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on content like this. If you haven't already, now is the perfect time. It's just one click. In any case, this proximity is crucial because Kadyrov isn't accountable for the typical structures of the Russian state. He doesn't answer to the Ministry of the Interior. He doesn't answer to any governor. He answers to one man, Putin, and he does so directly. It's not an agreement between institutions, it's an agreement between two people. And why does this change absolutely everything? Because when an agreement is between institutions, it's more likely to survive. The minister changes, the governor changes, and the pact remains in place. But an agreement between two specific men usually dies with them. In short, order in Chechnya rests on three pillars that share the same structural flaws. They depend on a single person. And that visual politic community brings us to the million-dollar question. What will happen the day Kadyrov is no longer there? This is the big question. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's impossible to know. Unfortunately, we do not have a crystal ball. That said, there are several possibilities that, at first glance, may be the most likely. The first is the one Kadyrov himself is rapidly putting in place, turning Chechnya into a legacy passed from father to son. We've told you this before. Kadyrov is betting heavily on his son Adam, whom he has been showering with positions and honours, exactly what his father did for him when he came to power. But take note, because this isn't the only thing he's doing. He's also reinforced this strategy with a second move. He has been marrying his children to the children of his top aides. The most talked about case is that of his daughter Tabarik, whom he married off to Ramzan Vismuradov, the son of one of the most powerful security chiefs. And he's done the same with the rest. One daughter married to the son of his former interior minister, another related to a high-ranking government official. A veritable web of marriages in the tradition of the Catholic monarchs. And this matters a great deal in Chechnya, because don't forget that Chechen society is organised into clans. There, family, blood and lineage matter immensely. In other words, through these marriages, Kadyrov is tying the regime's major clans to the fate of his own family, making it extremely costly for anyone who, in the future, might think of turning their back on their own people. Of course, even that isn't enough to secure the family lineage. And this is where things get ugly for Adam, because these inheritances from father to son, especially when they're arranged so hastily, tends to cause problems, and even more so when the heir is so young. There are countless examples of every kind, and those who end up winning usually do so for the same reason, because they've played their cards right and have managed to eliminate any rivals. Ramzan himself did this when he succeeded his father, and so did, to give another example, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who went so far as to execute his own uncle to consolidate his power. Well, Adam, so far, hasn't eliminated anyone. Will he be able to do it? That remains to be seen. Of course, keep an eye out because there's another key player in Chechnya, and he's not Chechen, it's Putin himself. Let's remember that he's the one who, to a large extent, is footing the bill for the whole show. With his word could tip the scales one way or the other. If Putin decides to strongly support the son and personally takes it upon himself to sweep away any rivals, or to surround him with clans and trusted men who will act as regents until he matures, then Adam does have a good chance. However, the fact that everything depends largely on Putin's favour is also his greatest weakness, because that support, just as he could give it to Adam, could also be given to anyone else. And this is where the second major option comes in. Kadyrov is in without Kadyrov. What does this mean? It's quite simple. Deep down, the Chechen model works for Moscow. What it doesn't want is to change the machine, just the face. Keep the apparatus of repression and control intact, but with another man in charge. Neither a son nor a dynasty. A replacement. And who might those replacements be? Well, there are a few names floating about, and it would be a good idea to be familiar with them. The first, and perhaps the strongest contender, is Magomed Daudov, the enforcer of internal purges, the man who has done the dirty work for years and has held the highest offices in the Republic. A man feared even by the Chechens themselves. The second is Adam Delimkhanov, Kadryov's cousin, a deputy in Moscow, and his right-hand man for a long time. A man with his own networks, his own muscle, and direct contacts in the Kremlin. And the third is Abuzaid Vismuradov, the religious leader to whom Kadyrov married off his daughter Tabarik, another heavyweight in the security apparatus. And take note of what these three have in common, because it's crucial to everything. They are ruthless, they control their own armed men, and their loyalty lies with Putin far more than with the Kadyrov family name. And that makes them the perfect successors for Moscow if it seeks smooth continuity, but also a huge threat to the current leader's family. And that brings us to the third option, the one the Kremlin has been trying to bury for 2 decades, for everything to blow up. Because don't forget what kind of people we're dealing with. Chechnya carries the scars of centuries of resistance against Russia on its shoulders. The imperial conquest, the deportation of the entire nation to Central Asia in 1944, and 2 wars that left the country in ruins. And that resentment has not vanished under Kadyrov, and this is crucial, that sentiment has not disappeared. It has been crushed, which is quite different. The regime does not rely on the people's affection, but on fear and collective punishment. It is, so to speak, a pressure cooker with the lid tightly sealed. Why hasn't it exploded yet? Well, not because the Chechens lack anger. If anything, it's because they lack the opportunity. They're exhausted from 2 wars, and know that every time they have risen up, Moscow has returned and crushed them. That's why they rebelled only when Russia was weak or looking the other way. In the chaos of 1917, during the Soviet collapse of 91, never when Moscow was strong. And that leads us to a disturbing conclusion. The Chechen uprising doesn't depend on Chechnya. It depends on a rift opening up within Russia, a defeat in Ukraine, a crisis in the Kremlin, or the security apparatus splitting in 2 during the succession. Right now, there is no leader to spearhead it. True, but the history teaches us that when the time is right, leaders appear out of nowhere within a matter of weeks. And that is ultimately the big question we're posing to you. Do you think that rift in Russia could open up right when Kadyrov dies? Leave us your thoughts in the comments, and if you like the video, you know the drill, hit the like button and subscribe. Take care, I'll see you next time.
Kas sinu küünid säästab energiat ja on varustatud avarate ja kergesti ligipääsetavate sügavkülmikuseadmetega? Haieri
I'm ready here. There are many moments in my life when I think this is very strange. One of the most bizarre things that happened to me happened in the 1990s when Russia first took part in the Eurovision Song Contest. I was being given a tour of Russian state television and wandered into a studio where they were rehearsing for that evening's Song for Europe. And I got talking to the director and told him I liked Eurovision. He said, "Oh, well, come back this evening, you can co-present the programme." I thought, okay.
Сотрудник компании, подданной Британии, Стивен Розенберг.
Добрый вечер.
Добрый вечер. Стивен, как в Англии относятся к конкурсу песни Евровидения?
В Англии очень любят.
Things like that happened in the 1990s. There was this buzz in the studio, and it felt like, after the fall of communism, Russia was now part of this European family, and we were going to do great things together, and the world was going to be a better place, and a safer place, and a happier place. I mean, you know, when you're young, you're completely full of an optimism, and it just didn't work. Since Vladimir Putin came to power, Russia has become a very different country. It felt as if this huge black cloud had come over. Russia had taken a very dark path.
Simply calling it a war can lead to 15 years behind bars.
We've seen journalists detained, arrested, put on trial. No one is protected by prosecution.
Virtually all of the independent media in Russia has closed down. Many journalists have already left the country.
I've never criticised any reporter for having left Moscow. But living and working in Russia, trying to report on what's happening right now, does feel as if I'm walking this tightrope. I remain fascinated by Russia and want to know how this is going to end. Every year, in December, there is one event which goes on for 4 or 5 hours. Vladimir Putin live on television, answering questions, and there's no guarantee that you get a question. But you need to prepare for it, because if you do get an opportunity, you want to make it count. So I go and try and practice the question, so under my breath, walking up and down. It has to be like a decent question, otherwise there's no point asking. You want to ask, what is your favourite colour, Mr. President? Yes, Russia,
Президент Российской Федерации Владимир Владимирович Путин.
The thing is that some of the questions that Vladimir Putin gets asked are not difficult for him to answer.
Вы счастливый человек? Ну, как я вам скажу?
They're really sort of puff questions.
О чем вы мечтаете?
Есть, конечно, но это же личная мечта. Можно я скажу про себя?
But I think it's important to ask a serious question with a serious answer.
BBC я обещал, да, пожалуйста.
Oh god.